Hello again. Welcome to the Behold podcast. My name is Craig. This is a ministry of Arcade Church, and we are so glad that you're joining with us today. We are in episode part 2, actually, of our conversation with Dan Dunmoyer, who has been involved with California politics probably for the last 150, 200 years, something like that. We're pretty close to it.
I'm younger than you, Craig.
That's right, I forgot. Anyway, we want to continue another episode about this because even after the first one, we had some really great conversations with the staff and the team, and Dan was gracious enough to stick around and respond to that. And so I'm going to, you have the microphone by you, Shelby? Okay. She's off camera, but she had a question for Dan that I thought was so good. And so why don't you go ahead and ask that again, because I was surprised by your answer. Go ahead, Shelby.
Sure. So last episode, you had talked about just information that we receive and how do we accurately interpret that and figure out what it is that people believe. And so my question for you was, where do we find that information? How do you find out information that is credible? And if there are other sources that we can be looking to truly be curious and find that out?
Yeah, I think it's the question of public policy and politics in America. And the answer to your question, really, there's none. I mean,
There is not one
credible,
partisan
objective,
or bipartisan
source. I mean, you can go to Mr. Biden's website and Mr. Trump's. You can go to Newsom versus Dolly in the last election. But the idea of and it doesn't have to be, of course, the first thing is, well, I'm not going to trust it if you write it, Dan, because you have a unique perspective. You're right of center or whatever. It's like, no, you write it. You write it and just send it to me. And it's got to be under 5,000 words. I'll give you some really broad limits. But to your question, Shelby, amazingly enough, there is nothing out there. And what's really sad, I mean, you can find stuff on Mr. Biden, Mr. Trump, and the big candidates. But what about city council, or what about mayor, or what about school board?
Yeah.
What do you believe in? Do you believe in
the
vouchers
things
or
that
not?
You said last episode that really matter.
And that's where the greatest lack of information is. And you get, a glossy brochure and it says, a bad picture, a grainy picture, and this person beats small puppies. So I can't vote for them, not realizing they actually work at SPCA and they weren't beating them, they were picking them up. I mean, a bad picture can look bad. So that's a source that's a great opportunity, Shelby. How you made your first million.
But Dan, what about the Christian voter guides?
I mean, again, the Christian voter guides will only give you look at how many blank spaces there are. Look at how many things are in. It's good to look at them. I read them. I look at all of them just to get a sense, because some people will put in their actual positions, and that's informative. But oftentimes, half the candidates, usually the ones that the Christians don't necessarily agree with, I'm not even going to respond because this is controlled by a group I don't agree with. So find a group that doesn't take a position, says, you take the position, I'll print it for you, and put it in. So we do lack in as much information. We're bombarded, as I mentioned, with all the social media, but the reality of it is it's very, very truncated. And it's really just a soundbite. It's not a thoughtful conversation. And we desperately need a thoughtful conversation in this country.
Big time. Yeah, big time. Well, this episode, we wanted to get talking about political involvement for Christians too as well, and not just voting, but being involved with that. And I think that many times we Christians, we live in a victimizing culture where everybody's a victim, including Christians. We tend to think that we're being trampled on, that our rights are, to the point where we feel like in the book of Kings, we're Elijah and we're the only ones left. And that I get why we would feel that way, especially in California. But then God comes and says, hey, better check again. I've got 7,000 others hiding in a cave that have not bowed the knee to Baal. And so you're not alone with that. And I think that's where the power of the local church can come in, regardless of talking about right or left politics, is that we can be that place where we can be able to worship Christ and love Christ and elevate him and still talk about those issues that we're faced. But what do we say to the person? What would you, for example, say to a young man or young woman in college that may have been a younger version of Dan Dunmoyer at USC so long ago, and you had these aspirations of being involved in politics? What would you say to that person if they came to you and said, I'm thinking about a political career. Do I or do I not because I'm a Christian? What would you say to them?
I mean, I've had those conversations with some of our members and their members' daughters
you
and
probably
sons.
wrestled with that yourself personally, didn't you? A
No
little bit?
question, yeah. And I originally, back when I was in Hemet High School and USC, I'd planned to run for the White House. I mean, that was my ambition.
Yeah.
Found there was other ways for me to get involved, and having a family was more important than electoral politics.
Yeah.
But I urge Christians to get into electoral politics. I mean, keep in mind the two greatest political leaders, I believe, in the Bible. If you look at our Daniel and Joseph, the most sophisticated of all political leaders of their day. Not like somebody like me that only worked at a gubernatorial level, but somebody who worked at the kingdoms of the world. Mm-hmm. And they did so with Pharaoh effectively, and at that time, the ruler of the greater world for Daniel. Mm-hmm. And not only did they involved in politics, they were at the highest level. They were the prime minister. They had the signet ring of the king or the Pharaoh. They determined how everything operated, and they worked for men that were diametrically opposed to the God of Israel. And they did so effectively, powerfully.
Without compromising.
Without compromising anything, not even
with
the food they ate. I mean, if somebody gives me a fat steak, I'm going to eat it. But Daniel wouldn't. And the reality of the fact is he took it to the ultimate level of living his life.
Yeah.
And, praying, knowing that he was being set up by these wicked advisors of the king. Mm-hmm. He lived his life flawlessly to the point, of being thrown into the lion's den. We learned that, we were 6 years old and had our flannel graphs. Nobody else knows what those are. But anyways.
Hey, for the do any of you guys know what flannel graphs are? 100%. You, Chad, Ben? Oh, man.
So Veggie Tales is kind of the modern era.
Yeah, right.
But in that whole dynamic, you have, that simple story, but a profound political leader in the kingdom of the day, bigger than the United States, closer to the size of England in its heyday.
Yeah, these were global, at that time, global
empires.
leaders, yeah.
And they both lived godly men. Interestingly enough, I mean, David had his sins, and I know that Daniel and Joseph sinned, but there's not a lot of talk about their sins in the Bible. They really were amazingly godly men. And of course, you have Deborah. It's not really gender specific. Who the men were so respectful of her, they wouldn't go into battle.
They wouldn't go into battle
without her leading it.
Yeah.
And so you have women also in very prominent leadership positions. Kind of the modern day Wonder Woman who steps forward, but leads both in truth of communication, as in she was the judge, but she was also a military leader and a political leader, and did so in a way that men followed her because of her godly lifestyle. So, I mean, you have great examples in the Bible of people who stepped up within the kingdom of Israel, but outside the kingdom, during times of despotic overruling by wicked pharaohs and wicked kings, literally advising the king, you're about ready to get your kingdom lost the next day, and written on the wall by the hand of God, and giving great information and great counsel to the king to say, your kingdom's over, and God told me to tell you that. So powerful things, powerful examples. So to your underlying question, do get involved. As crazy as American politics is, it's not the same as working for Pharaoh. And you should participate. You should give people an alternative to vote for somebody who is character-filled, God-fearing, hardworking, and desirous to make the city, the county, the state, the nation they wish to run for a better place.
Well, and two, as you mentioned, with Deborah and Joseph and Daniel, these all three ruled in the face of oppression. In the case of Joseph and Daniel, they weren't in their own home country. Joseph was brought there as a slave. Daniel was brought there as a slave. Different periods of history. But that is so significant to where we are living now. In fact, Tom Norris, one of our pastors here at Arcade Church, he is making the observation in one of our staff meetings a couple of weeks ago, that our state is in a situation right now where we are being positioned to see God do something. What that looks like, I have no idea. But when you see the hand of God move in wonderful and miraculous ways, it is almost always when it seems as if we're at rock bottom. I think we have a ways to go before we're at rock bottom, but I love that sense of hope. And that's what motivates me to stay in California is I want to have a front row seat to that. of whatever that looks like, whether it be locally or state-wise or federal or global. What do you think in the sense of that when a person is coming to you and talking about political involvement, and they're lamenting about the fact that so much of the policies in our state are contrary to the gospel of Christ or to the church itself? How would you advise them to be involved with that then?
Well, again, you can be involved by participating first in voting. I mean,
Yeah.
are you even registered to vote? You move, you forget to register. Now it's pretty easy because everybody gets their mail-in ballots and mail-in registration. When you get your DMV renewal, you have to, they ask you to register. So first of all, do that first step. I mean, second, it is very frustrating. Some of these policies are so anti-biblical, and they really don't make any common sense, even in a secular world. But it is, part of it is because people don't speak out. They do get this sense of dread. They kind of go to their hill and hide, and they don't communicate to people and find out that other people share their views who may not even share their faith, but share
So are they
their
in their own
views.
little mini echo chamber then, basically, that people are just echoing back what they want to
That's
hear?
the sad side of social media is once you express a view. I always try to go on multiple websites of completely contradictory views, and the people who do the algorithms their heads must explode.
And they can't figure you
because
out.
I'm pulling in everything from every politician. I get invitations to contribute to every political stripe in this country
Right.
because I want to know what they're saying, what they're thinking.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm a kind of a political junkie, so you probably don't have time for that. But you do have time to engage and to find out what they're saying. And I think also it is to articulate to people that you are interacting with. I find in politics that as you're interacting with people is just to state what you believe and where you wish to move people. I mean, politics is influence, and politics too is providing basic needs. I mean, the definition of politics, there's two: poly meaning many, ticks meaning bugs. That's the fun one. It's lots of bugs.
That's one I use all the time. I mean,
But
come
the
on.
more accurate one is the allocation of scarce resources effectively. So when you look at it, it's like, do you want to drive down a road in Sacramento that's full of potholes, which you will right now?
Yeah.
Do you want a school that's falling apart and has asbestos and your kids can't drink the water? I mean, you look at the basic issues. Is it safe to live in this community or not? And if it's not, then you engage.
Yeah.
And somebody's like, well, as Democrats, we don't believe in that. Of course you do. As Republicans, we don't believe. Of course you do. It's like you really want to have horrible roads and unsafe streets and schools that don't teach your kids. Now, how you get there, that's the equation.
That's the difference, yeah.
But you do try to find those areas of commonality. And by the way, there are people who don't support those things. That's a whole nother story. But you find that common ground and you engage in it. And you try to bring more people into that perspective, regardless of any other beliefs they may have. Try to make it so that it's understandable. We tend to argue on things that are very profound, but don't change our daily lives away, whether you can drive on the road, educate your children, and live safely in the community you grow up in. And those are some simple things you could do.
That's good. Thank you. Two more questions. And this is your opinion, because I know that you're a student of Scripture and stuff. Are there issues that are non-negotiable for you from a political standpoint that by virtue of your conscience, you must vote this way? And then the second question is, are there issues whereby we can give latitude with other believers? In other words, is there an issue out there where we just say, like one pastor, a very well-known pastor said, I think the last election cycle, from a biblical standpoint, there's no way that you can vote Democrat. And he got a lot of flack from that because there's a lot of Christians who are Democrats. I'm guessing he's referring to abortion. I don't know. I don't think he ever clarified. But then there's also a guy that says, can you with a clear conscience be a Christian and vote Republican? And he said, absolutely not. So you've got these two extreme poles of people where most of us probably live somewhere in the middle. And that's probably what frustrates us, because the people who get the clicks are the extreme views. And then we have to sort this out somewhere in the middle. From your perspective, are there things that are non-negotiable for you and things that, you know what, I get it, I don't agree, but I get why they say that?
I mean, there are things. For me personally, it's the issues of life. I'm willing to trade the death penalty for abortion. It's kind of when you look at policies, like how can you be pro-life when you believe in the death penalty? And okay, I've always said to my friends, okay, well, if you give that up, I'll give this up. The reality of the fact is it's also being sensitive to that. I mean, it doesn't mean that somebody who's had an abortion is not to be dealt with honorably and to understand the situation they're in. It's a very, very sensitive issue.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is the love you bring. If a woman comes to you and she's pregnant and wants to have an abortion, you're going to love her through her decision.
Yeah.
I mean, she has a right in this state to make a decision. So, I mean, for us, I mean, for me personally, I look at those issues. But
We don't give her the stiff arm and say,
well, that's not love.
no, it's not.
And so the situation, I mean, Christ dealt with people who were involved in things that were unacceptable to the day, but he did so in love. So, but I also look deeper than that. It's not this single issue that motivates me. I do look deeper at candidates because candidates can be really good on one issue that's important to me and really horrible in how they live their life and how they treat people. And so it's not just an issue candidacy. I mean, that's an important issue for me, but it's not something that I have voted for people who I disagree with on different key issues. Because there's even myself, I don't always agree with myself, so I don't agree with everything every politician of
Can
all
we
types.
just explore that? Let's see. Dan Dunmoyer doesn't agree with himself. I wonder what that sounds like.
It's called wisdom and age. I thought I knew everything when I was in my 20s, and I
I know.
realized I didn't.
I'm
And
with you on that.
Life's a lot more complicated than simple sound bites.
I
even
thought
back
I was
in the
smarter
dark
than
ages.
I am. Oh,
So those are issues that I look at, but I do really look at how people live their lives. And one quick story, I was in a situation where I invited a young lady, a colleague, to hear a well-known speaker, one of the most well-known pastors in America on some very controversial issues. And he was introduced by a bunch of politicians. And so I said, so what do you think about this pastor's comments on these issues of the day? She says, well, this is all these Christians here talking about how to live their lives. And I said, yes. I mean, was this helpful? Did you find this profound? She says, the three men who introduced this famous pastor, they've all hit on me. They're all married men.
Oh, you're kidding.
They all asked me to sleep with them. So it's not just what they believe in. It is how they live their lives. And so it kind of lost me. So I was here trying to give her insights to Scripture and gospel. And she says, it was clouded by the fact that the men who introduced this great pastor were family men who asked me to sleep with.
And the gospel takes a back seat.
A massive backseat. So it really comes down to the gospel again. I mean, it really comes down. There's very few, I know there's very godly people in politics, but there are very few who live out a life of godliness in politics. It's hard. And so, I mean, for us, we do need to cut through all that and try to find the right men and women who live their lives in accordance with Scripture and tell the truth and live honorably. And those are the leaders we need to elect. And there are Democrats who fit that category, and there are Republicans who don't.
What?
They are.
That was Dan Dunmoyer, our former chairman of the board, speaking. It was not Craig Hardinger, who likes his job.
So
No, I hear you. I'm with you on that.
So
Absolutely.
you have to, you do need to be aware of that. That doesn't mean the policy positions they take are policies I wouldn't necessarily agree with,
Right.
but they are people who look you in the eye and they tell you the truth. And that matters.
Yeah, bottom line, too, has there ever been in your voting? My first vote presidentially was Ford Carter. I just turned 18, and so I was pumped about voting in that particular election. And since then, for you, what was your first presidential?
It was Reagan Carter.
Reagan Carter, which is the next one, basically. Has there ever been a candidate, you don't have to give the name if there has been, where you were 100% in agreement with every single policy that candidate advocated?
Yeah, there's one, Eric Seastrand. So he passed away from cancer. He was a state assemblyman, and he lived his life honorably. The positions he took were, I didn't disagree with one of them, and he treated...
Did you work for him?
I worked, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And he was somebody who the Democrats loved him, the Republicans loved him. He lived his life in an honorable fashion. There's not a lot. I mean, other men I've worked for and women I've worked for are great people, and I'm greatly honored to work for them. But there are issues I didn't agree with them on.
Right, yeah.
And so, I mean, Governor Schwarzenegger had some great positions on policy that I fully agreed with. He always wanted to make this a better state, but he took positions on issues that I didn't agree with. So there was that one, and interestingly enough, the Lord took him away really quickly from cancer. But yeah, it's rare to find somebody that I fully agree with.
Yeah.
And I don't expect anybody who's out there voting to do so. But you do try to find candidates who, when you put all the issues together,
Yeah.
You find them to be closer to where you view it.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Okay. They may want to edit this part out, but you got to tell the story of the cigar tent. All right.
Which one?
Well, just generally speaking.
Oh, well. So I'm working for Governor Schwarzenegger. He loved to smoke his daily cigar.
A daily cigar.
I have respiratory issues, so I always, the senior staff would sit in this thing called the smoking tent.
And it's in the square of inside the Capitol?
So the Capitol right now is under major renovations, but if you were to go in there, inside what's called the horseshoe, so the horseshoe is where the governor's office is located. It's looks like a U.
Okay.
Inside of it, there's an open courtyard. Under California state law, you can't smoke within 15 feet of a state building. So the governor had a tent made that fit 15 feet from the inner side of each wall. And every day around 2:30, 3 o'clock, he'd go out there and light up a Monte Cristo or some other cigar.
Right.
And we'd talk policy. We'd talk politics. We'd talk life. We'd talk issues. And that was his daily activity. And those of us who were part of the senior staff would sit in there, and we'd have famous people come in. We'd have mayors. We'd have movie stars. You'd see somebody like Cheech Marin or Jamie Lee Curtis, or you'd see Sylvester Stallone come in, and you'd have cigars with them. And I would sit there and try not to breathe. I always exhaled. But it was a great opportunity to see what I call real politics, but real lives.
Yeah.
And clearly he's one of the most, prominent and gracious figures I've ever had the privilege of working for and with. But yeah, that was a daily activity, Monday through Thursday, 2:30, 3 o'clock to 5, and then he'd get on his jet and go home, and we'd get back to work till 2 in the morning. And that was the daily grind in the governor's office.
Yeah.
About 110 hours a week of work. And but it was a great opportunity to learn and to be part of California policy.
Yeah. Well, Dan, this has been great. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us. We're very grateful for that. And once again, if you have any questions or if you disagree with something that Dan or I have said or in the past episodes, we want to know. We're not claiming that we know everything. We really want to learn, and the way that we can do that is through conversation. And so it may be that you've got something that we never considered before. We would love to hear from you. And so if you have that, go ahead and email to behold@arcadechurch.com. We would love to hear from you. And then once again, as always with episodes, what do? We click, like, comment, or subscribe. Why is that such a difficult thing for me to remember?
I don't know. Must be age.
It could be age. I don't know. But Dan Dunmoyer, thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. We're a very grateful team. Thank you. You guys are amazing. This is our new studio for now, and so we'll keep on working on that. In the meantime, thanks so much for being with us. Bye.